Good afternoon. I'm just gonna send a tweet out about this quick. I think they have a Twitter account. We'll see. Maybe not. I thought they did. Okay. All right. We are continuing our work on finatr, which is a finance web app. We particularly have been focusing on the budget, kind of the budget portion of it. Let's get a terminal up here. Throw that on another window. You can just go ahead and start it up right away. So what we're trying to accomplish is we had started this component last time we had streamed this, and we have a concept of transactions already, and they're used in this cash flow analysis. But as it starts up, we'll open it up here. But the idea behind the cash flow analysis is that you can kind of have some sort of confidence on how your money reserves will be in the future based on your various financial events. And that's been doing too much Gatsby, I guess. And that's a good thing. But I think it's here's the cash flow. Let's go ahead and get out of the dark mode. I feel like this is probably easier to look at right now. Note to self, I need to figure out a Windows manager too. So the cash flow it's good, but I think it is not terribly approachable for somebody just getting into this, and the idea and terminology behind budgets are more comfortable, I think, for those in the beginning stages of getting a handle on this stuff. So we started working on a budget, but it's not going to be kind of your typical budget. We want to make it composable, to both allow somebody to build up different expenses. So like house expenses, a big group of things. which includes, mortgage, repairs, insurance, taxes. And we want to be able to kind of take all those expenses that fall at different time periods and boil it down into something that is understandable. For the most part, we've been working in the cash flow with a daily rate. So basically, how many dollars a day does it cost to pay for, how many dollars a day does it cost? Yeah, relative to how many dollars a day you make. So the Ryan was asking if it's gonna hook up to a bank account or anything. Right now, it doesn't, and I don't foresee that happening anywhere in the near term. Just because to do that, you basically have to go through one or two different companies that integrate with the different banks. One of the newer ones, this kind of startup one, is called Plaid, I believe. Yes, and they were just bought out by. Yes, you would have to put it in manually, but let me get to that quick. So I think Plaid was actually just bought out by Intuit, maybe. But basically, it's not cheap, to the point where it's almost more expensive to pay for this than the user would be willing to pay. But I don't think that's a detriment, because when we enter everything, for the most part, we are entering in reoccurring expenses. So it's not a list of transactions that have happened. It's a list of transactions that you expect to happen and will repeat. Does that make sense, Ryan? So, where's my income on this one? Paycheck here. So, on here I've got 2 paychecks. So all we do is enter it once, and it in this case we get paid on the 1st and on the 15th. Yeah, and that so inconsistent income is definitely something that we will need to deal with. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's a couple ways I think we can deal with it, and some of that is potentially better dealt with on the business side of things. So the best recommendation that I've heard as far as freelancing goes is your freelancing business is a separate entity than you. So your business makes money on a different schedule, but then you should allocate effectively a salary that is obviously a lesser amount than you make, but is on a very set schedule. So then you get paid like you're on a salary. And as far as all of this stuff goes, it's just going to be on the 1st and the 15th or something like that. And then your actual business will be the thing that's seeing the ups and downs. Yeah, definitely. So it's and that's I think something that's worth thinking about too, as far as running your business / doing taxes, because that's kind of how the government thinks about the business side of things. That even if you own the business, you as a person are a separate entity than your business is. So there's a handful of reasons to think of it that way. But I think there is still some validity in dealing with inconsistent paychecks. So if you have a situation where you're working multiple jobs, or you're doing, gig economy is the big buzzword these days. So you might be working a part-time job that is consistent, and then you might also have sort of a gig on the side that will make you other income that is less consistent. And I think in this case we would enter it in a future amount. So you would expect to get, $500 in 2 weeks. We can enter it in here, and then once it falls off and is reflected in your actual balance, so you've received it, then we can basically flag it in this list that it should be deleted because it's not being used anymore. I think that's the best way to deal with that. What do you think about that, Ryan? Basically, you can enter in one-off transactions that will be flagged once they would, or once we assume that they have showed up in your accounts. So if we say in 2 weeks, in a month, when somebody would look at this, then it would basically flag it and say, hey, this was expected to land 2 weeks ago. Has it? Yep. So you can actually do that right now. But for these examples, I don't have it do that because obviously that would, I put in an example for 2 weeks out. So when somebody comes around in a month, it's going to be gone. So it doesn't make sense to put any in there. But there's this no repeating type. I mean, this is all stuff that businesses do. But there is, I'll say, business level software and software that, a company might hire a accountant to work in. So there's already software that's sort of built with the business in mind. So this could potentially be useful for a small business / freelance kind of person. But I think for the most part, once you get into the heavy business and you're hiring somebody or outsourcing it, there's potentially better software that's worth using to manage it. Not necessarily because this isn't done, but because the focus is different. So it's software that's better focused for business. So specifically in this budget, we want to be able to compose, and I think the two big things are composition and basically being able to run what if scenarios. So one thing that I created some time back, and it actually just came up the other day, is this loan efficiency calculator that I on my site. And basically the idea is that there is a concept of debt snowball or debt avalanche, which I kind of make note of here. Basically, you pay a set amount over and above your loans, and then you as you pay off loans, you just take that amount that you would have paid and apply it to the next loan in line. So I think like little calculators like this where you can run what if scenarios, like, should we buy a house or rent, that kind of stuff. Those are the two big things that I want to be able to encapsulate into this, which is not represented in any budgeting software or that I've seen, and I think would be tremendously helpful. So the thing that we kind of need to figure out today is how do we want to model that. So we're using Microstates. We've got most of our state lives here. And for the most part, it functions off of classes. And we specify types, and you can specify other classes. Hey, Naren, good to see you. Or see you in the chat. And then, so you can specify different data types for what form of your data will be in. And you can also specify methods. It's sort of similar to other state libraries that you might have seen out there. And within the methods, they have an concept of transitions. So we're working on finatr, which is a finance web app, open source finance web app. And that debt calculator was something that I made a while ago that will potentially likely be included in this at some point. So I've done a couple of those little calculators, either on the website or in Excel, and I'm slowly working on rolling all of this into this. So unfortunately, the way this library is set up right now, most of our methods end up having to be at the top level. So app model is sort of our top level of the data, and then we have all these different pieces, and these all reference the different smaller pieces of state contained here. So if we would go to transactions, a little bit smaller. We've got less methods here. So I'd like to be able to split that up at some point. But we kind of need to wait for the next version to drop before that happens. They're looking at adding that, because this is getting hard to maintain. But we already have a concept of transactions in here, which is what we are using here. See you, Aaron. Good to have you. And within this transaction, we also have a recursive amount to it. So we have already built some ability to compose. So this amount computed is this, of which it can refer to itself. So this computed amount can have effectively an unlimited nest of data behind it. So I think we can kind of operate on that same functionality already. So there's the value, and if we're composing it, a house expense, the top level of an expense probably would not have the value included in there at all, but rather they would have a list of computed amounts, and that the computed amount would come on, cat. Yes, I know you want attention. But so the only downside with this is that we only can we are not representing transactions within the amount computed. And we do want to kind of specify all of this, the start and end type. So this is valuable if we want to have we have references, operations, so we can basically literally compute an amount. So the idea behind this was specifically with credit cards, those get harder to deal with. Oh my goodness, cat. Okay. Oh. kind of a needy thing. These are in the cash flow, we're using it particularly in the debt, I believe. So you can compose amounts, particularly to deal with credit cards. So credit cards are painful to deal with because the amount that you pay every month can change. Even if you're doing, if you're just paying it off in full every month, that amount will still be different every month. So there's not, even though the schedule of payments is the same, the actual value that you pay is different. So that was a big driver behind adding this amount computed. But I don't think we're going to be able to use that directly. So I think that really the best way to deal with this is to make a new class that composes multiple transactions and lets you basically group transactions together. Yeah, I think so. So then it would basically be like if you were you'd be defining a group, and then you'd be putting expenses in that group. And you could potentially have multiple groups, which would all bubble up. Yeah. So we've got a amount computed, we have transaction. This would be a is transaction group to I guess it's either too obvious or it's too general. We'll go with it. So let's define an after transaction. So extends is going to, if we would extend transaction, that would be, it would bring in all these values. So here we've got a transaction computed, and that's basically saying I want to use all the values from transaction, but also include these as well. So we will probably end up referencing, no, we do want to reference transaction. I think so. So I think the first thing we'll have is a group, and that will be of string type. Group equals string type. I guess we'll have, should we call it notes? Well, we call it description, and the other one I think will be consistent. So we already sort of have, we have a category, which is sort of a, maybe a mild form of grouping, you might say. And you can add in any category you want. So I wonder if maybe it's worth tying into that. I think so. So then a user would drop in all these transactions and add a category, and then it would be included in the different groups. So how do we deal with, I think category right now is just something that somebody will type in. So it's really open-ended right now. So we could potentially only let somebody add a category if they've already added the group for it. So we've got, right now we're grouping by rent, student loans. So if we just went off the category, I think that would allow us to do the composition how we would like it. But will that let us deal with the what if scenarios? I guess we can do that at a group level. Within the group, you can basically list the budgets that you'd like to show it up in, like it to show up in. So we can have potentially multiple budgets, and each group would opt into which budget it needs to show in. Yeah, I think so. So, group, maybe say group name, description. So the group name will be the category from transaction. We already have all the repeating calendar type information on the transaction, so we don't need to duplicate any of that. And we can pull the value off of there. So it's probably just going to be transactions. And that will be an array of it's array should be in our index here. Oh, wrong index. This index. Array of array type of transaction. That coloring is kind of weird, but we have a group, we have the description, we have the transactions. Are we going to need anything else? We need to be able to add up all the values. So this relationship is a microstates function, and it will in this case it's self-referencing, and what we're saying here is that at a value, parent value is this, we want to use the value here, this recursive stuff starts to get mind-bending. So we've got an amount computed, and this is basically like a type definition. So this type will have a value of this, and that is going to be value is the transaction value, I believe, and then parent value. No, I think value is the value that you set, that you give the that's value, I think, and then parent value is this whole piece. So the parent value references, which would be this, if that's defined, then we also set the references. So we're doing that to when we run a computation, we can basically deal with it like a string literals in JavaScript, where we can say I want to add this value plus this value, and we don't actually have to define the value. We can just give it like a variable reference. So it's not going to be quite as complex, but I think we still need a relationship. Group named. So what should we call this? I guess it's going to be, this is actually going to be the transactions. So we can say I'm not sure if this is going to work, but I think we go, this is a transaction. We want the relationship to be an array of those. And we're going to just go ahead and do this, and then let's log out value and parent value so we feel confident about what it's actually giving us. Gotta define it, primitive array type. And we don't have that defined anywhere. So we're going to have to import it on the top level and say transaction group. So we've got both transactions and transactions computed. When we set the transaction, we are so every time we set a value, we are running this recalc. And it does some transaction things and some account things, which calculate the cash flow analysis. So, and then when do we set it? Let's see. So we split up our transactions. And we do that because income and expenses and transfers are all defined in the same place, but we want to split them up to display them different. And then we set everything. So charts calc. So here we're setting the split transactions and the charts, and that's coming off of the net. So that is our actual state, which is being calculated by transaction computer. not thrilled with that name in retrospect, but the transaction computer takes in the transactions, and we do some splitting up to deal with these paybacks, which when you paybacks, I don't remember what the course paybacks is. Resolve financials. Let's take a look at that quick. So course paybacks, we are, so if somebody defines a debt payment, that payment is both a credit and a debit. So it's negative in one account and positive in another account. So it's when you make a payment, you're taking money out of your checking account and putting it into the credit card account to pay that back. But it doesn't make sense to list that twice, so you list it once and then we coerce it into two transactions. So we take that one that you have entered and make it into two. So here's this compute value that runs this transaction computed, or the amount computed rather. So the transaction that we have just contains the values, and then when we run this compute value here, it will store that in the actual value. So if we would look at our example, what does the data look like for that? Examples. So we do enter in a value for all of these. And I'm assuming that in our transactions here, so I believe this gets overwritten because we have defined a computed amount. But it's not overwritten in the transaction, it's overwritten, or well, it's defined in the transaction computed because we have a computed amount. So we have transactions, which is effectively our raw data. We have this transaction group, which will be that is going to be an array of transaction groups. So then we need to give it, I think in this transaction computer we actually set the so here we've set it. So transactions computed set, that's one transition, and then we do some modifications of that. so we would need to do another set in here. And that will be so it's transaction groups. So we can say and transaction group and then I believe we can add a new method. So transaction group dot what should we call it? When we give it a set of transactions, we want to like group it up. Sort is kind of reserved already. Organize. Feels weird, but so I think we want to give it the same values that we have for the transactions computed. But it's already doing some stuff. So maybe we actually take this out. We say it's not going to be the initialized, it's going to be the, we'll call it grouped. So init dot transaction group dot organize, and now we will pass. Oh, actually, we're computing them here. Returns the microstate with the transactions computed set. So our actual computation happens here. So when so this is scoped. So this is the app model. So we're saying the app model, transaction computed, do all that stuff, and then it'll give us essentially the initialized piece. So we also need to set the transactions for the transaction group. I wonder if we can do that as like a relationship. And I know there's intent to allow that to happen, but I don't know if they have gotten that far yet. Do I have it open yet? I do not. Microstates, is it still in this list? Sure. So I don't know if they've got the relationships even. The relationship is like the new feature, but don't know if it's been documented very well yet. Yeah, so there's no documentation on it. But I think we can like reach across. So we have an app model, and below that is effectively a tree of values. The thing that we want is to be able to, from one branch, reach across to reference another values in another branch. But I'm not quite sure how, or if it's even able to do it in the relationship yet. So let's try just doing this. We'll say organize or organize. We'll see where we're at here. I think that'll give us. We should get a value because we're doing the method here. We're running the method there. We want to return this as well. But I don't think it's actually gonna. I'm not sure if it'll give us anything about this relationship. But let's see where we're at there with that kind of starting point. So we're still just getting the recalc. So set, map, and sort are all built-in methods. Oh, I know what I need to do. So this is an array. So we need to do a map, group, so we've got an array of transaction groups. And really, I guess technically that should be with an S, but so we want to map over the transaction groups, and we want to run that method on each group. Yeah, that's interesting. Somehow we lost our styles for the tabs. Okay, group is assigned a value but never used. Oh, yep. Which is true. So if we say console.log group, what is that going to give us? So that gives us the transactions and the accounts. So it is our app model. But we're still not getting that method to run. So we do a transaction compute value. So we're doing the same thing that we're doing there, and that is running. So we should be able to organize transaction group. let's comment out this transactions just in case. Okay, array type is defined but never used, which is fine because we just commented it out. So why isn't it showing up? So we're logging out the group, which should be that. So 162. Yeah. But we're not getting this. Literally this. And I wonder if it's because we don't have any values there yet. So if we did transaction group dot set and we said we want to set the group name as testing. Yeah. So we need to define values in there. Because otherwise it's an empty array. So we need to be able to, so if we give it a bunch of group names, it should be able to then reach across to the transactions and pull the references basically. So if we do this, let's see what we're actually getting there. So that's the 106. So we are getting the group name, the description. Okay. And now if we look at the transactions, let's go ahead and get rid of this one so we can kind of see what's going on here. So we're getting transactions and they are not that relationship is not running. So if I set the, this is going to be the app model. This dot state is the, let's grab the transactions. I could potentially say group name. So if I said transactions or transactions, is that gonna kick off our relationship? Huh. I am gonna need a refresher on that, I think. Okay. So a microstate is a basically like a JavaScript object, and it holds references to things. So if you actually want the values, you need to do value of, which we don't have defined. Value of. Ooh. So we're getting group name and transactions. So we've got one transaction. So I don't know that this part is right. Why is that? I'm not quite sure why that relationship is not giving us any values. And I know I've figured that out at one point, but I do not remember what I was doing. So relationship is, so we're giving an array. I think setting it like that I don't think that that's actually going to work. So if we just set the group name, it's just going to give us the group name. But how do we get that relationship to run? So it's giving us one transaction right now. But for our type, we want array. Maybe we need to actually set it as an array. I think this is the one thing with this library that I haven't quite... I generally like working with it, but these relationships are... I am struggling to find the best way to debug them. So we're still getting just a group name, and that's... I'm not quite sure why this log is not running. So it's running this organize. And all that's doing is just returning this. So this is setting the value. Yeah. Okay, so if I said return and I want to try logging out this. Thank you for fixing that. Value and parent value. Can we get anything from that? Yeah, it doesn't run them at all. Interesting. Now why? So I wonder if it only, if you access it, I wonder if that's the only time that it actually will give it to you. So if we log this, but we also want to say console.log this dot transactions dot, we'll just say that. I think it's something like that where, because so all of this is lazy, which is nice, because it'll only run these functions when you need them, need the actual value back. But also means that I run into this situation where I think it should be running, but it's not, and I'm not quite sure why. So here we're getting an undefined, and this dot transactions, 96 and 108. Okay, so now we're getting it. So we do need to just, since it's lazy, unless we actually like call it, it's not going to compute that. Or it's not going to compute until we actually call it. So 96 is here. So we're getting an undefined and we're getting a group value. So this value is the let's do this. We'll call it thing, and we'll just log out the whole piece. Yeah. Thing dot value. Thing dot parent value. Okay. So we get a path and the name, which is the name of the field. So that's this. We get a value. So it's not been given a value. We get a parent value, which is going to be this whole piece. So if we give it, let's go back, give it all the transactions actually. Transactions. So that should mean now that our value is defined. So here, now we've got all the transactions. And we could, we say it is an array, and the value, I think I was actually right before where I want to make this whole thing an array type. So we're going to return an array type of transactions. Need two. Okay. So now we should be able to, we only want to return so if we did switch this back to value, parent value, and we're going to map over this to give us an array that matches the group name. Or should it be, so the value is already an array. We want to, maybe I keep going back and forth on this. Yeah. Our value is going to be an array of transactions, or a type will be, and our value will then be this mapped thing. That, yep, okay. So our value is going to be transactions. Nope. It's going to be value dot. So value will in this case be all of our transactions. So value dot map. So our value is going to be a transaction. And I guess we don't want to use map, but for right now that's fine, just to test. Because we want to filter that. I think there's a filter. So filter transaction if transaction dot category equals parent value dot group name. So we want to filter and only return the ones where they match. So in this case, um, 105, 106. Oop. So this dot transactions gives us this. So we're not getting any values right now. Which is correct because we only have a testing group name. So if we went here and we said a category of default transaction, if we go, nope, this one. Let's look at paycheck, I guess. So if we give it a group name of paycheck, we should have two. We don't. Oop, value. There we go. Alright, I think we got the relationships working. And I believe that will let us I wonder if we can traverse higher than just this parent value, if we can go up a path. Because it did give us a path. But we'll have to play around with that a little bit. So we've got basically a minimal data model here with a relationship to the transactions. And we want to be able to reach across the branch. I think we'll have to do some more research on that. I may or may not do that on stream. But from here we should be able to then make the idea of a composition of the groups. We want to have a description, and then we also want to do what budget it falls under. So budget. So it'll be an array of strings, and that'll basically let you list which budgets it should fall under. So you can then run what-if scenarios on that. So this group can be included in one budget and not another. And I mean, we probably want to be able to yeah, we'll have to think about that category a little bit. It seems to work for now, but I suspect when we get into the budget part of it, and that might fall over, but that'll be next stream. I think that's enough for our lunch hour. Glad to have everyone. Thanks for stopping by, and have a good day.